So this is part 2 of the Supra auto to manual swap R154. So this one is going to show the taking out of the exhaust, taking out of the drive shaft and its transmission, and flywheel, dipstick for the transmission, and taking all your disconnect connectors off. So I hope you enjoy the video. If you know a different way to make it better or do an easier way to do things, please let me know in the comments so that way everyone else can know. Like I said, this is informational. I like looking at videos before I do things, so that's what I'm doing. Hope you enjoy the video. So next you want to take out the bolts that connect the rear or from the cat's back, right, for your exhaust cat back. So these two bolts here, I had to cut mine off because this bolt here is stripped completely out, and I'm gonna put a new one on in there anyway, so I figured I'm just gonna cut it out. So next clip that you'll see is me removing the two bolts that are connected to the downpipe from the turbos. Those two bolts are 14 millimeters, so are the ones in the rear. So once those come out, then you can take that whole exhaust piece right out. So now that we got the exhaust taken out, now we're going to take this one of these plates. This is essentially a diverter or a heat, keeping the heat off of the drive shaft and the drive shaft from cutting off or touching the exhaust. So we're going to take this off here. These are 10 millimeter bolts, and the ones those bolts here. So we're working on taking the little pieces off so we can get the drive shaft off now. And we're going to loosen up the bolts for the actual drive shaft here. Now, the nice thing is that you can select, right? So pull back twice. Now you should move smoothly, right? So I already did these two bolts, so now I'm going to rotate it around, and there we go. Pull it all the way back, locked, and we can take the bolts off. Those two bolts. Now I'm just loosening them up for right now. To take off is this cross member, because if we don't take this cross member off here, we're not going to be able to get the whole drive shaft up. Another thing we're going to do is take off the actual bearing that because this is the Supra had a two-piece, has a two-piece drive shaft, and I'm going to put a full one piece in there. So I'm going to take this piece out here, and then we're going to first take this piece, take these bolts out, and then we'll take these out, and then we'll start taking the last little nuts and be able to take the drive shaft out. Now the next thing we're going to do, like I said, is going to be taking the center piece out. Now, it shouldn't fall because of the fact that I have everything still attached, but we'll see. Put that in there. I'm going to take my bolts in front here off. So there's a little nut on the back side. I got to hold. Otherwise, it doesn't go anywhere. There's a washer. There we go. So what it does, you see the little shaft that's on here that slides off of. So now we're going to take out the transmission dipstick. There's a bolt that holds the actual transmission dipstick in there, and once you take that out, you should be able to pull this right out, and then we won't have to worry about it later. Okay, now that it's out, just give it a hug, pull, all the way out. Alright, so once you have the exhaust and the drive shaft off, the next thing we're going to work on is going to be taking off our trans cooler lines. So there's two of them. There's one here and then one here, so they respectively go there. I have the transmission kind of taken off just so a little easier, so I can move around a little easier. So you have those two, and then there's one, these lines connect to up here on the very front there, which is a little 10mm bolt that you gotta take off as well. And then one other thing we have to take off is gonna be this bracket here, which this bracket sits right here on the very bottom, and then it goes on the front side of this exhaust and holds the exhaust, the downpipe, and then the mid pipe together, and kind of gives us support for it. So make sure you take those off as well. So the next thing we're gonna do is drain the fluid from the transmission. 14mm bolt. The reason we're draining the fluid is to make it a little bit lighter so we don't have to worry about it later. Once you drain the fluid from the transmission, we're going to work on disconnecting the torque converter from the flywheel. As you can see, if you go up in here, there's a little cover that sits right there that you just pop off. It's a little rubber cover, comes right off, and then you'll be able to see the actual flywheel through there. It's really hard to get a shot in there. I'll throw this little clip in there. You'll see how hard it was. I kind of got to focus on one of the bolt heads, and once you get that in, you're gonna take that, you're gonna hold the front crankshaft. So there's a 22mm bolt that's on there that you're gonna put on there, and then you're gonna have either a friend of yours or a really long breaker bar with a extension on it, like a pole from your jack or whatever. Put that on there, and then once that is on there, then you can break the torque for the actual torque converter bolts. So once you get one done, you're going to rotate the whole thing using the harmonic balancer, and then pretty much put it right to where, if you're using the method that I was using, which is the pipe, because I'm by myself, put it right as the opening, as you get to the opening, so that way when you tighten it, it'll pretty much end up right here in the center of it. And that is all 6 of them out. Bolts out of the actual transmission. from the engine, there are 6 17mm bolts and then 4 14mm bolts. Now the 4 14mm bolts, there are 2 for the starter, which I took those out first just because it was a little bit easier, so I can actually hold that up there and make sure that you are holding the starter. You do not have to take the actual terminals off of the starter if you don't want to. It just made it I didn't take them off because it was just easier. I can kind of set it out of the way, and then when I go to put the new transmission back in, I can just set that back in there. Now, taking the bolts off, there's 2 on the very top. Now those were the hardest to come out. I pretty much had a 5-inch wobble extension with a 10-inch wobble extension and a standard 20-inch extension on all of that on the very top of the transmission. Slid it all the way down, and then I used a breaker bar to break the torque, and then use a ratchet, or you can use an impact to pull out the rest of the way. Once you get the 2 top ones out, there's one more that's on as you're looking from the back of the transmission. There's one more bolt that you have to use the extensions to get at, and then there are 2 lower ones. You still have to use. I used the 5-inch wobble and then the 10-inch wobble, and was able to get those on each side. Now I just broke the torque on those at the very beginning, and then I used it at the very end. That was the last 2 bolts that were holding on to it. Alright, so there are 2 more bolts on the back side here, which are right there and right there. Right, in comparison, on the bottom half here, there's 2 bolts that face the other way. So if we go do this way, right, this bolt right here, and then up there, right there, that bolt are facing from the back side. So those are 14mm. We're gonna take those out, and then we're gonna put. So once we get those 2 bolts out, we're gonna take put the transmission stand underneath there, and then we're gonna take our 2 last bolts that I left in here, which are on the very bottom here, just to get a lot easier to get out. There's one here and one right there, and then once we get those 2 out, then we'll take our last bolts out of here with the transmission jack on there, and then all we should have to do is just slide it back slightly, and then it should come down nice and easy. We'll see how it goes. Actually taking the clips off of the transmission, which there are 6 of them, and there are also 3 brackets that hold the actual electrical harness to there. Now what I did was took a few of them off, which was in the very tail part here. So here's one that I took off here. That's the vehicle speed number 2, and then there's one on the other side. Then there is this one here, which is vehicle speed sensor number 1. And then you have another connector that's right here, okay, and a connector here. That gets this right here, which I still left on there because the bolt is up on top and it was really hard to get out at. But there's another bracket that goes right here in this bolt hole right here, and then there's another one that's actually up on top, which I waited until the transmission came all the way down and I was able to get that one off. Not all the way down, just partially way down. Once you get as much as you can, much of the clips as you can get off, then you can start putting the transmission jack underneath, like this, right? Put the transmission jack underneath, and make sure that you're supporting the front of the engine, because once you remove this, it likes to tend to move forward. So support the front of it so that way it actually comes off a little easier. Now, one of the things I had difficulty with was trying to get the torque converter off, and that is because the little nipple that is on the torque converter there. That little nipple sits inside of the flywheel, and I was having trouble. It didn't just, when I actually disconnected everything, so I took all the bolts off, and I was trying to get the transmission out. It wasn't actually coming out. So what I had to do is I had to rotate the crankshaft again, and then keep prying on it to get it to where it actually popped out. And once it popped out, then the transmission pretty much just came out nice and easy, with the exception of the few extra plugs that I still had left on it. Now we're going to take out the 4 bolts that hold the transmission. Actual cross member here. Next thing we're going to work on is taking our flywheel off, which, so we have 8 bolts around here. We'll again use the front there, the front of the crankshaft, put the 22mm on there, and then we'll break all the torque for those and take our flywheel off. Alright, so once you get the bolts out, then you just kind of give it a little pry and come right out of there. And then there is, so we have on the front here, right, there's a little spacer. There's a little spacer, and then on the back side, there's another spacer. Take both of those off before you put that flywheel back on. If this is still on there, it will stick up too far. It'll mess everything up for when you put your clutch and everything back in. We have the transmission here, and I'll show you some of the plugs. So we got one plug here, which is, this is on the right hand side, and then there's another plug right here, which is also on the right hand side, and then we have a plug here, which is on the left hand side, another plug right here, which is on the left hand side again, left hand side, and right hand side. And again, this was where one of the brackets were connected. Here's another one for the actual wiring harness that goes across. We have these 2 bolts here were for the actual starter, and then these are the very top 2. And then you have another one, like I said, that's on the back side of there. And then these were the 2 that I left in on each side to be able to hold the transmission in before I took the last, before I put the transmission jack underneath. Here's a little better shot of looking at what the little piece that was stuck in the flywheel that I was having trouble with. And then here's one of the threaded holes, and then there's the other threaded hole for the ones that go on the base all the way.